Welcome back to Arise News Hour. I'm Charles Anyagolu. Now, reports from Zimbabwe say soldiers are still roaming the streets of the capital, Harare, and assaulting people. This is despite President Emmerson Mnangagwa denouncing their violence as unacceptable. A government-appointed human rights group in Zimbabwe has accused soldiers of using systematic torture in a crackdown on protests. On Monday, Mr. Mnangagwa broke off a trip to Europe to deal with the continuing unrest. Back in Harare, he urged all sides to work together to fix a broken economy. Our chief correspondent, John Cookson, has this report.
At least 12 are dead in Zimbabwe's recent violence, and for the first time, victims of beatings by the military have been speaking out. This is Fare Mapasi.
They had 12 cars and they came to my area asking me where the home of our local councillor was. I told them I didn't know, and they started beating me with metal rods, logs and barbed wire. My hand was broken twice and I have a crack on my left leg. After beating me, they left in a hurry.
Another patient with a leg injury asked to cover his face. He says, if I'm recognized, the soldiers will kill me. I don't want to be seen speaking out. More than 600 people have been arrested. Most have been denied bail. Several people have been dragged from their hospital beds, according to witnesses, and then held in police custody. The government-backed Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission is accusing the security forces of using disproportionate force.
At least 8 deaths have been reported to the Commission and mostly attributed to use of live ammunition. Whilst the police officers in charge were not forthcoming with their side of the story, the verified facts raise a lot of questions around the crowd control capacity of the law enforcement agents. They seem to resort to use of brute, excessive and disproportionate force in most circumstances, thereby causing avoidable loss of life and also worsening the situation.
President Mnangagwa, who's only been in office 14 months, returned to Zimbabwe on Monday to try to stabilize the country. The economy is groaning in debt and towns and cities are racked by sporadic violence. Ordinary Zimbabweans say they can't afford to live.
Up to now, I don't have fuel because I can't move to join other kids to get fuel. I'm not cooking for kids. I'm just stuck here. I don't even know where to start from. And now the fuel is $3.31 from $1.32. I'm now going to get a quarter of my full tank.
Opposition groups say they'll continue to use violence to overturn Mnangagwa's election win. Zimbabwe is braced for more dark days. John Cookson, Arise News.
Well, let's go straight away now to our London studio and speak to John Ofe-Ansah, who's an African affairs analyst and publisher of Africa Briefing. Good to see you there, John. What's the latest that you're hearing on the situation in Zimbabwe? Because the impression we're getting is that it seems like the crackdown has worked, at least in the short term, and that Harare is pretty much back to normal and that the protests are not continuing.
That's right. The reports you are getting are correct. But I will attribute it to Mnangagwa's return to Harare, was it yesterday or the day before? You know, because we shouldn't forget that this violence, you know, the security, the high-handedness by the security agencies happened whilst Mnangagwa was away. And we shouldn't also forget that his vice president is the General Chimwenge, the one who actually stayed the Palace School in November 2017. So though one cannot wholly absolve Mnangagwa of this crackdown, but it did not happen directly, you know, on his watch while he was in the country. It happened when he was outside the country. So ostensibly, he's back to maybe to bring some sense of calmness to the whole situation.
In the background, of course, John, we're hearing that detentions are continuing. I mean, there are more reports of arrest. We saw you know, John Cookson's reports there, and of course people going into hiding and sort of ugly scenes of essentially rampaging soldiers beating people up savagely.
Yes, that is what the president, well, on his return, he posted a Twitter saying that the high-handedness of the security agencies, well, he condemned it actually, and said that it will be investigated, and if needed be, or if need be, heads will roll. Okay, so he must be seen to be, going by what he posted on Twitter, and try and clamp down, control the excesses of the security forces. Because we shouldn't forget that when 6 people were killed on August 1st last year, that was after the aftermath of the elections, a commission of inquiry was constituted. They came out with their reports, but nothing so far. Right? The commission actually in this report condemned the excessiveness of the security forces, but nothing has been done so far. So Mnangagwa, to me, since he came to power, has been making all the right noises, right? Has been making conciliatory moves, to the white families. So he must not let, the security forces, throw the spanner, into the works.
What impact, though, might all this have on the already poisoned political atmosphere in Zimbabwe? Because the opposition MDC have said that the overtures from President Mnangagwa, who's called for a national dialogue for healing, won't work until the government releases opposition MPs and other civilians that are still being detained.
Yes, that's right. Look, violence, begets violence, right? If the opposition, are hell-bent on even using those words, overthrow the government, well, in political parlance, I'm not a political scientist, but I know it to be seditious, okay? They should heed Mnangagwa's call, for national dialogue. To me, that is the only way forward, to heal this fractious situation in the country. I mean, the intransigence by the opposition wouldn't help, saying that it will resort to violence, because the violence will also be met with violence by the government. And it should not be in the interest of Zimbabweans at large, for this situation, to continue.
And John, the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, which we heard them talking on John's package there, which is backed by the government, the Human Rights Commission is, now criticizes the government about the force that's apparently been used. I mean, just how independent is the commission, and is its criticism a sign of how much the democratic space is opening in Zimbabwe?
Yes, it is opening, yeah, but they don't have, powers, of prosecution. They cannot prosecute. They can only come up with their recommendations, and it is up to the appropriate authorities to take appropriate action. Theirs is to point out any anomalies, any human rights abuses, and so on and so forth. But they cannot take any action, beyond that.
Okay, John Ofe-Ansah, we really appreciate your coming in. You are, of course, live in our studios there in London. John Ofe-Ansah is the African Affairs Analyst and publisher of Africa Briefing.